The curious thing about this text is that it's a real comparison of two books, one of mine and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, an analysis made by ChatGPT in the form of a conversation between two fictional characters who, and this is what's truly crazy, are asking themselves if we live in a simulation. In other words, two characters simulated by AI wondering if we live in a simulation. The analysis is real. They are indeed comparing both books, but the interlocutors are fictional. Pretty crazy, right?
The title grabbed me immediately. Does Kalki dream of virtual cows? Seemed such a clear nod to Dick that I looked for it, like someone approaching something already familiar. And of course, I expected to find something inspired by Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, something evocative of Wilbur Mercer, perhaps, and the brief moment when Al-Jari appears in the story. But I was surprised. From the first pages I felt I had entered a different, and yet very Dickian, so to speak.
Dickian? I think it's hard for me to go that far, although I admit that at every turn I see inevitable parallels. As I read it, the figure of Barry, an anti-hero, drunkard, and criminal who is elevated to a messiah, made me think of those Dick figures who always seem trapped in a web of imposed realities and roles. But here, the relationship between reality and simulation feels more self-aware. In They Dream of Androids, the cult of Wilbur Mercer and the presence of Al-Jari exist in a world where people are searching for something authentic, in a worn-out, almost hopeless spirituality. Here, by contrast, the cult of Kalki seems to gain strength precisely because the audience is thirsting for a real illusion.
To begin with, Barry, the protagonist, is not an android. But his role in this story, his transformation into Kalki, goes far beyond human or synthetic identity. He moves in this world of virtual beliefs that he himself embodies, though without knowing how far the character goes and where he himself begins. And I think that's where the similarity with Dick lies, that constant ambiguity between who one really is and the role we're constructed to play. It's not exactly Deckard or even Mercer, but that same tone of alienation, of playing with identity, reminded me of them.
I see what you're saying, but here we're not talking about a society that is hooked on illusion as a simple escape valve, are we? The virtual religion that Barry embodies is building something, a cult that he himself seems unaware of.
Exactly. And that's where the interesting stuff starts. In Dick's story, Mercer becomes a cult figure through a religious simulation meant to provide solace, whereas here, the technological cult around Kalki becomes a real illusion for people, rather than a guide or redemption.
Yes, although the essential difference would be that, in Do Androids Dream, Mercer's cult is presented more as an echo of a manipulated spirituality, almost worn down by its own system, whereas here, the figure of Kalki ends up seeming more real than the simulation itself, almost as if it becomes inevitably tangible, and that strikes me as a new touch.
Totally agree, and I think that's why I would define it as a Dickian world, although it clearly takes its own directions. I don't know if it's the tone, the characters, or that uncertainty between reality and virtuality, but it manages to convey the same unease. That's something that makes you wonder if we ever stop being under the control of a larger simulation.
So, in a way, Barry not only struggles with his own role as Kalki, but he is also forced to confront the nature of the simulation that surrounds him. The illusion of a messiah, but with the possibility that it's all underpinned by a lie, albeit one that he himself ends up accepting. An interesting detail to the theme, I would say.
Definitely. And in the end, I think that ambiguity between illusion and reality is what makes this play resonate with Dick's universe, albeit in a new way. Barry doesn't become Kalki because someone bestows the role on him, but because the cult absorbs him until the fiction becomes real, or something like that.
Yes, it's almost as if the lie itself becomes a truth because of the way people need it, which, to me, has always been one of Dick's most interesting themes. How real is what we believe when we all believe it, even though we know it's a construct?
It struck me that there are android hunters in this story, albeit very different from Deckard. I don't want to reveal too many details of this gripping and not at all predictable book, but these Martian android hunters are almost the opposite of what we find in Dick's work. They are repulsive, inhuman in their brutality, and their programming to neutralize seems disconnected from any kind of self-awareness. They are not solving a problem, rather they feel almost part of it.
Exactly. The hunters here are anything but empathetic. Sometimes the androids show that calculated coldness, which could even be read as humanity reduced to its most pragmatic form. But Agent Lopez, the neutralizer, is another story entirely. If anything is inhuman in this work, it is his coldness, but it is a kind of cruelty so perfected that it leaves one uncomfortable. Unlike Dick's hunters, who seem to be torn between indifference and guilt, Lopez seems to be almost a machine in his own brutality, relentless. Perhaps he doesn't even have that fragile empathy we usually expect in a human figure, and that makes him all the more disturbing.
What I think makes this story so fascinating is how it captures something mystical and, at the same time, apocalyptic. It's not just a science fiction story, it's like it mixes spirituality with a very direct message about technology and the power it has in building modern idols.
Exactly. And Barry is central to this. He's more than just a figurehead for the hologram, the experience of 3 years as Kalki transforms him. It's not just someone lending his image, it's a vision of what it would mean to live as a god, or at least feel like one, from within one's own being.
It's a very powerful point, and it's fascinating how the novel alternates between dark humor and these almost poetic, surreal, even chaotic moments. At times I felt it was almost like watching a Metal Hurlant comic, pure delirium, yet profound at the same time.
It's true. It has that visual, even cinematographic tone. In the rhythm, I also felt that way. It goes from humor to religious satire, or even social criticism. Technology here is like a substitute for the divine, and the novel is not afraid to poke fun at contemporary idolatry.
Yes, and in that its pacing is somewhat similar to a current series, I think, but with its unexpected twists and turns. As it progressed, I wasn't sure if Barry was Barry, Barrilito, Kalki, or all three. And even more disturbingly, if he really knows who he is in all this.
That's the most puzzling thing, isn't it? The novel establishes that he is Kalki, or at least it seems that way, but there remains ambiguity. That interplay between Barry's different identities and their manifestations on different planes almost creates a paradox of who he really is.
The narrative itself becomes a bit of a challenge. It mixes logic and chaos so coherently that you end up believing it. It's a mystical thriller, in a way, that seems to violate logic without breaking it.
And with that structure, it's as if you were in a story that you have to construct yourself. It's more than just reading, it's assembling the world between the lines. Sometimes it gave me the feeling that I was watching the destruction of a reality from the inside.
Yes, the destruction of a virtual world by its very foundation, something that paradoxically was built to shape it. It's a novel of twists, but not just in plot, also in meaning.
Sure, and that's what makes it such a captivating read. It's almost as if the reader himself needs to be integrated into it to get the full meaning out of it. Definitely a story to reread and rediscover, again and again.
So, would you say it's a Dickian work? I think yes and no. It has that ambiguity and play with identity that reminds me of Dick. That way of leaving the reader wondering who is who, or what is really real. But at the same time, I feel the pace and atmosphere here are different. It's a less dense mix, lighter, and, at the same time, wilder. Something that allows you to enjoy yourself without necessarily sinking into melancholy.
I'm inclined to think it is. That instability in reality, the loss of meaning in a universe that seems to come apart at the seams. That's Dick, no doubt. But then there's Barry. He has a more cynical yet vulnerable tone, something that makes him less dark than Dick's anti-heroes. It's as if this story has an irony that Dick lacks, a kind of playfulness with the idea of the divine that's not meant to be solemn.
Perhaps that's why I'm inclined to think that Kalki Dreams of Virtual Cows could be Dickian at heart. That exploration of truth in a world of simulations, of what we are when we believe in something illusory. And yet, there's also an almost playful way in how the story unfolds that takes it away from Dick and into its own space, as if this universe is less sad and more delusional.
And that's exactly what makes me doubt. It's like he's Dick, but with a touch less grim and more open to the possibility that the illusory has some truth to it, at least in this universe. In Do Androids Dream, the universe feels doomed, a web of alienation almost suffocating. Here, the chaos has another nuance, a sense of humor that perhaps softens the hopelessness. So, is it a Dickensian work? Perhaps yes, and at the same time, something else entirely.
I would say it's a tribute rather than an imitation. An homage to Dick, with its themes of reality and alienation, but also a subtle parody that, however close we get to that tone, indulges in other nuances, a lighter one.
Perhaps we will never know if it is a truly Dickian work, or a work that simply converses with it in parallel. Perhaps, and here I contradict myself a bit, that ambiguity is what makes it, in a way, yes, it is.